Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Conte, and I'm the host of the Sweet Success podcast. I am joined with our therapist, Erica Wilson, and our life coach, Taylar Posey.
Hey, girl.
Hey. So we talk all things mental health here. Anything that is afflicting us or bothering us. Look, I get afflicted by a lot of things, okay? But today we are specifically talking, we've actually had someone send this topic in to us to want to discuss PTSD, which I think is a little bit misunderstood. Maybe if you haven't experienced that. The first thing that comes to my mind is veterans, right? Like experiencing PTSD from war. But that's not all we're talking about here. So let's open up with what exactly it is.
Okay, so PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, it is an emotional, psychological reaction to trauma. And so like you were saying, most people really we're thinking about our combat veterans who have come back from war and they've experienced a really traumatic event. But we're talking people who have experienced like a shocking event, a frightening event, such as natural disasters, a car accident, sexual assault, domestic violence when they were children, or even a female or male who have been in a domestic violent relationship. So an emotional, psychological reaction to trauma. And the thing is that about 1/2 of the United States adults, we're talking adults here, will experience at least one traumatic event in their life. That does not mean they're going to have PTSD.
Okay.
So when someone who has a diagnosis of PTSD, they have experienced something on a level that has affected them emotionally and psychologically. And these experiences cause them to have things like flashbacks of the event, nightmares, trouble sleeping at all. They will have, feelings of fear. They are always on edge. Really just anything that can trigger them emotionally or psychologically is going to be related to that event, that one event. The flashback is always going to be related to it, and any kind of way that they respond to certain things that remind them maybe of the event, walking past a certain location. Say if there was a sexual assault that happened, or someone who might have been kidnapped, or someone who had a car accident. Every time they go past that place where the event took place, there may be some sort of response that the body has. And that can come out in multiple different ways. It can come out in physical ways, heart racing, shaking, mind racing, complete shock and fear, where they're just stopped in their tracks. So PTSD is thrown out a lot. People say it, I have PTSD from, my 5-year-old throwing a temper tantrum.
Right.
Now, I get it, and that's not to some people who truly had postpartum depression might have PTSD from labor. That's a very real thing.
Right.
But because I am mad at my 5-year-old because he's had a temper tantrum that day, I can't say I have PTSD tomorrow being afraid he's going to have a temper tantrum.
That's just us being dramatic.
Right.
Is what that is.
Yes. Yeah.
Dramatic.
So PTSD, an actual diagnosis of it, we have to remember, is an emotional, psychological response to a traumatic event.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I think too, and I know before we started this podcast, we were just joking about people who might have PTSD on the job. But sometimes that can be, I don't know that it would necessarily be diagnosed as PTSD, but I do think a lot of people, whether they've experienced a lot of stress or anxiety in a certain place, whether it is their job, or I have a couple of clients specifically that I don't know if it would necessarily be diagnosed as PTSD, but when it comes to be around a certain time of year for holidays.
Right.
Or if they, you know, have a family member that's very confrontational, and maybe the year before there was a situation where, you know, something happened with that family member over Christmas, they're very reluctant to want to go back to grandma's house for Christmas this year because crazy cousin is there.
Right.
Or you're very reluctant to go to work tomorrow because, oh my gosh, what just happened today was terrible, and every time I step foot in my place of employment, I feel like it's terrible. I get a knot in my stomach. I feel stressed. So like Erica was saying, if you look at the definition of PTSD, I don't know if those things would necessarily be considered PTSD, but I do think for a lot of people, whether they're joking or not, I got PTSD when I go to work every day. It is a very real feeling when you have experienced something negative in a certain place or in a certain situation, and then when you have to go to that place again or relive that holiday with that family member, those feelings of, oh my gosh, I just cannot go, I cannot do it, and the anxiety does set in. It's real.
It is real.
Yeah, it's a good point, because, you know, PTSD, anxiety, depression, all of those, the diagnosis, all three of those things can go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so just like she was saying, you don't have to have a diagnosis of PTSD to have that fear, to have that what if this happens again thought. Because that's a very real thing. Stepping into an environment that caused you some sort of feeling or some sort of emotion, or maybe you have an anxiety disorder and you've had an anxiety attack or a panic attack at work.
Yeah.
You're going to have a fear for a little while that's going to recycle of, you know, I might have an anxiety attack again at work. That's not going to prevent you from going to work, or not even the fact that that feeling or that fear will go away at some point. But that fear and that anxious feeling and those knots in your stomach, that's there too. But again, it's not a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, because someone who has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, that feeling that we're talking about right now, this fear or this anxious feeling, it's way more than that. It's more intense. Those people who have PTSD actually go into this place in their mind where, as though the event is actually happening still,
like reliving.
currently. Yeah. So they are in a place of, they're not just on edge. They're not just anxious. They go back into their brain currently as if the event is taking place. Which is why, you know, they show it in movies all the time of war veterans that have come home and they're at a 4th of July event and the fireworks go off and they've been fine for 9 months, and then all of a sudden they're having these symptoms and their brain flashes back, which is what I was talking about earlier. It flashes them back to that event, and they're almost out of it for a little while until they snap back into reality of where they are. But it causes a very traumatic event in that moment, because they have relived something that was so harmful to them in that time. And it's so important to receive therapy or coaching through PTSD, because what we use and what I use in therapy for PTSD is cognitive behavioral therapy or exposure therapy. And so what's happening there with these clients is I'm really helping them rewire that brain and those thought patterns, because I can't take the event away, but I can help them rethink the event. I can help clients say the word that they're afraid to say.
Right.
I can help them be exposed to their worst fear in a healthy, safe setting. And I've had to do that with a couple of clients who do have PTSD, and and them not being afraid of, okay, well, what's going to happen? It's me reassuring them that they are safe. We are not in the place where they feel as though they are in that moment, but that we are in a safe place, and that my goal is to make sure that they see themselves on the other side of it. But it definitely takes time to get through. But understanding post-traumatic stress disorder is pretty complicated if you've never experienced a true traumatic event.
Yeah. I think it's important to note, too, that it could happen at any age. I had a student recently come to me, and this student probably 11 years old. He witnessed his grandmother getting killed. So he opened up and said that he has dreams every night, where he's reliving this situation to the point of he may not want to be on this earth anymore. In his little mind, I cannot get this. I've seen this happen to my loved one. I cannot get this out of my head. Every time I close my eyes, when I go to sleep, I'm reliving this moment over and over again. I don't know that he has an official diagnosis, but of course we made parents aware, and they've definitely taken the necessary precautions. But I think too, if you have young kids, or if you're listening and you are, a teenager, if you've been through something like that and you are feeling the symptoms, kind of like what Erica said, if you're reliving those moments, whether it's a death of a family member, unfortunately, if you've been molested or if something happened, please try and get some help, because if it overpowers your brain like it did for this young man, and you feel that the only way out of it is to take my own life, there are definitely other ways and people that can help you.
Yeah, and like she was saying, it happens at any age. We've talked before in other podcasts about childhood trauma.
Yes.
And a lot of times that doesn't come back up until you're an adult, or maybe mid-20s or an adult. And that's why it's called post. It's not happening preterm. It's happening after the fact. And that's because our brain has taken time to process what has happened. It doesn't mean it has processed it in a healthy way. It could be that the person who is going through PTSD has shoved it down so deep that they don't want to process it. But I promise you, it will come back. It will come back up. Those flashbacks will come. Those thoughts, the intrusive thoughts, the feelings and the fear of the event will come and resurface, which is why it's so important to get help. There is hope. There is treatment for PTSD. I have one client who was in a car accident, and they were the passenger of the car accident. And so they were extremely afraid to be a passenger of a car ever again. While in therapy and doing some exposure therapy with them, we eventually got to a place of where I was able to get the client into my car to be the passenger, and we drove from my office to one location back to my office. Now, the client was very scared, but was also in a very safe environment. And I had to remind the client that my goal, too, was to be safe.
Right.
My goal was to get to that location and back to my office safe. I never force anyone to exposure therapy, but it is showing this client, oh, I did it. I did something that I was afraid of and thought I would never do again. Now, does that mean after that session, this client left and was able to just hop into anybody's car? No. Because in the client's mind, the control was, well, if I'm controlling the car and I'm driving the car, nothing's going to happen. And I'm not going to be in the same experience or the event that happened when I was in that car accident. Months later now, this client has been able to be a passenger of a car to a different state, to different events, to different places, because we have continued to work on how the control of you driving the car versus you being a passenger of the car isn't going to change what the outcome could possibly be.
Yeah.
So that's what exposure therapy is with PTSD. And then, you just have to make sure you're reaching out and asking for help and not being afraid to admit, well, that happened 10 plus years ago. Why am I just now thinking about it? Why is it just now resurfacing? That's what it does post-event. That's post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's what it's going to do. And it's so important to just reach out and not feel shameful of it happened this many years ago.
Right.
Why am I affected now?
Right. Absolutely. I think, and we've talked before about when we've talked about anxiety or anxiety attacks, like speaking it out loud, it makes it feel not as scary. It makes it feel smaller. And so I feel like reaching out for help and saying, hey, I've got this problem is doing the same thing. You're making someone else, you're bringing someone else alongside you to help.
Yeah. It makes you human. We're all human. We all have our things. Like the statistics said earlier that I read, about 1.5 adults in the U.S. are going to experience a traumatic event. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot.
And the children that have already experienced certain traumatic events, and again, we're talking natural disasters, that's everywhere around the world. Mm-hmm. So how you handle it is different. But if you are one of those people that end up with a diagnosis of PTSD or a diagnosis of anxiety or depression with it, there is help, there is treatment, and there's hope. So don't give up on yourself.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway here would just be tell someone.
Yeah.
Reach out, get help. Nothing is too big to overcome.
Right.
Right. Well, this was very good, very eye-opening. We also need to stop being dramatic and say that we have PTSD from our children. We're just being dramatic, and we are a little bit scarred by them, but
we're scarred.
Yeah, but that's it. All right, girls, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Sweet Success Podcast with licensed therapist Erica Wilson and certified life coach Taylar Posey. If you have questions or topics you'd like to have addressed on an upcoming podcast, please message Erica on Facebook at the Olive Branch Counseling Center or Taylar on Facebook at 4031 Life Coaching and Consulting. Spell out 4031. For more information on Erica Wilson and all that she offers, visit theolivebranchcounselingcenter.com. And for more information about Taylar Posey and her services, visit 4031.org. Spell out 4031. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to our next time together. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform.
This podcast is produced by yourpodcastnow.com. Let us produce a podcast for you.